Zurich Airport, November 2001. Crossair Flight 3597 is one of the few planes left to land.
The commander was flying out of Zurich for the last 20 years, so he was really used to this airport.
Crossair 3597.
The lone controller in the tower tracks the approach.
Approach runway 28 for you.
I have ground contact. We're continuing on.
Crossair 3597, continue speed reduction to final approach speed.
But for some reason, the crew can't find the runway.
Damn. He said he saw the runway 1.3 miles.
And the flight ends in disaster.
Crossair 3597, this is Zurich Tower. Do you copy? We have a possible emergency and approach.
He collided with a hill, so obviously he was too low.
A terrible mistake sent a passenger jet dangerously off course, killing 24 people. The clues will lead investigators to a trained professional with an astonishing past.
Mayday, Mayday.
Crossair Flight 3597 is cruising at 27,000 feet above Germany. As the autopilot flies the plane, the crew begins reviewing procedures for their landing.
According to the report, the apron and taxiways are wet. Braking action's not specified.
So the friction report is missing?
Indeed.
That usually means they haven't been out to check lately.
Indeed.
It's the last flight of the day on this busy European route. The 660-kilometer journey from Berlin south to Zurich takes only an hour and a half. There are many empty seats on board. A group of 21 passengers never showed up for the flight. Internet entrepreneur Peter Hogenkamp is returning from a business trip in Germany with his partner, Jacqueline Badran.
On that day, we wanted to take the train, but we had to be in Zurich for that opening ceremony of that trade show, so we decided, okay, so we need to go by plane.
I've got to get some sleep.
It had been a very busy day, so we were very tired when we arrived at the airport.
Among the passengers is the girl band Passion Fruit, Germany's answer to the Spice Girls. They're on their way to perform the last show of a concert tour.
I was shocked when suddenly all the passion fruits, all the three of them, were coming over, and they were sitting right in front of us.
Just what I needed.
Flight 3597 is an Avro 146 airliner. It's a British-made jet popular with regional airlines like Crossair. Captain Hans-Ulrich Lutz is in command. He's been with the airline for more than 22 years, having served as a pilot and as an instructor.
So, tell me about the runway and the conditions.
Overcast with light snowfall. Visibility 3.
First Officer Stefan Lehrer is a newcomer to the airline. He's had his pilot's license for just a year and a half. He was hired by Crossair right out of flight school.
The passion fruits were being quite noisy. They were excited. I think they went from one gig to the other. So they were still in their stage clothes. I said, oh my God, do I really need this? Can I just sleep?
It's probably okay to move.
We decided to move back a few rows and change the side where we were sitting, so we were in a very quiet area then.
Crossair 3597, clear to flight level 160.
The flight is slightly behind schedule. It's due to land in Zurich in less than half an hour.
According to the latest information, we'll be using runway 14.
What kind of approach?
ILS approach.
Okay.
An
Approach
ILS,
course
or Instrument Landing System approach, means the pilots will be guided to the runway by radio signals beamed from the airport.
And a decision altitude of 1,602 feet. Call me 100 above minimums.
Okay, I'll call 100 above minimums.
The plane's sophisticated computers will do most of the work getting them down. At Zurich Airport, the weather is getting worse. It's snowing, and visibility is dropping.
Crossair 3191, turn left heading 150.
In the tower, controllers have started a nightly routine. A supervisor sends out a message notifying crews that runway 14 is being taken out of service because of a controversial new law. Planes landing on runway 14 must fly over Germany on their approach. But people in Germany have long complained about the noise.
Because of the political issue, airplanes had to fly over Switzerland in their final descent to the airport of Zurich for noise reasons. There was no other operational or weather reasons whatsoever. It was purely political.
Switzerland has agreed to shut down runway 14 after 10 p.m. to keep landing planes out of German airspace and use runway 28 instead. The crew hasn't received this information yet. But First Officer Lehrer is familiar with the new rule.
Should I ask if it's still runway 14? It's almost 10 o'clock.
Yes, I'm pretty sure it's still 14.
Zurich approach, Crossair 3597. Please confirm the approach in use is the ILS 14.
Crossair 3597, you're identified. It will be a VOR DME. Approach runway 28 for you.
Oh, hell. What next? Okay, fine.
Unlike runway 14 with its sophisticated instrument landing system, runway 28 is not equipped for ILS landings. Instead, it has a less accurate navigational system. It's called VOR DME. A radio beacon sends information to an aircraft about its distance from the runway and whether it's left or right of it. It provides no guidance on the plane's altitude. Pilots would rather not make VOR approaches because they place a greater workload on the flight crew.
He would always prefer an ILS approach because he gets guidance on the approach slope. And he can also use his autopilot to guide him down literally on ground to the runway.
Because of its less precise technology, runway 28 was rarely used for landings before the new noise law.
Okay then, rebriefing for runway 28. That would be chart 13-2.
Now Captain Lutz abandons the ILS approach he was planning and prepares his first officer for the new non-precision approach.
Are you familiar with the 28 approach?
Yes, I've done it a couple of times.
The crew goes over every detail of how they will approach Zurich Airport.
Residingen, Zurich. East 6,000 feet.
There are only a few planes left to land tonight,
3597.
including Flight 3597 and 2 other Crossair flights just ahead of it. As the aircraft approach the runway, controllers need to keep them apart.
Crossair 3597, reduce speed to 180 or less.
Speed 180 or less, Crossair 3597.
Captain Lutz makes the final turn to line his jet up with the runway.
160 knots.
The plane is now in the thick of the heavy weather surrounding Zurich. At the airport, the second last Crossair flight touches down on runway 28. Now, with only flight 3597 to land, the supervisor decides to head home early. The controller handling the aircraft is the only controller left in the tower.
Crossair 3597, continue speed reduction to final approach speed.
Zurich Tower, this is Crossair 3891.
She gets a report from the plane that just landed.
Visibility approaching 28 was borderline. We could only see the runway from 1.3 miles out.
But Captain Lutz knows Zurich Airport well. He continues towards the runway.
Gear down.
The plane begins the final stage of its approach.
Cabin crew, prepare for landing.
Captain Lutz begins slowing the jet and puts it into a steep descent.
Six miles is checked.
Yes.
Flaps 3-3.
Flaps 3-3 selected.
Final check.
Final check. Confirm 3 greens.
Is checked. 116 knots.
The descent gets even steeper.
Full flaps. Set.
Checked.
Flight 3597 is about 3 minutes from the runway. Captain Lutz expects it to come into view any second now.
100 above.
Do we have ground contact?
Yes.
Passengers prepare themselves for landing.
We were pretty close to the airport, so you think, okay, this is going smoothly, but it was dark and it was snowing, so we couldn't see anything.
In the tower, the controller monitors the flight to make sure it's lined up with the runway.
Crossair 3597, cleared to land, runway 28.
Two 4, the minimum.
2-4.
The flight has hit decision height, 2,400 feet above sea level, 1,000 feet above the ground near Zurich.
Decision height is the minimum height you can descend before you need to decide whether you can see the runway and continue the approach visually, or you have to make a decision to go around.
I have ground contact. We're continuing on.
500. 500.
Captain Lutz still can't see the runway lights, but knows that the flight ahead of him had the same problem.
400.
He said he saw the runway 1.3 miles.
They should almost be on top of the runway by now. But for some reason, they still can't see it.
Make a go around.
Crossair 3597.
The crew decides to abort the landing
Go around!
Go around.
and pushes the plane to its limits in an effort to get it to climb. Captain Lutz throttles up his plane's 4 jet engines as he aborts his landing at Zurich Airport. But it's too late. There's not enough time for the engines to get to full power and clear a tree-covered hill suddenly looming dead ahead. Residents of a nearby village witness Flight 3597's final moments.
I was walking down with my dog. All of a sudden I saw that aircraft coming from behind the forest, the little hill. And I thought, oh, it's very low and it's not on the same route as aircrafts normally are coming to land at the airport of Zurich.
The jet clips the treetops.
Suddenly, it was shaking very hard. What's happening? Something is wrong.
Moments later, the aircraft plunges into the hillside.
Crossair 3597, this is Zurich Tower. Do you copy? Crossair 3597, this is Zurich Tower. Do you copy?
All of a sudden, the whole sky in the west was getting really orange, like a big fire, like an explosion.
The impact tears the aircraft apart.
The wings broke off and the fuel is in the wings, so the flames really sort of shot inside the plane.
Crossair 3597, this is Zurich Tower. Do you copy? This is Zurich Tower. We have a possible emergency in approach sector east. I repeat, approach sector east.
Crossair Flight 3597 has crashed near the village of Bassersdorf, northeast of Zurich. Some people have survived the accident, including Peter Hogenkamp and Jacqueline Badran.
I don't have any memory of how we really walked out, because the back was cut off and we were just able to walk out there.
One member of Passion Fruit also survives, but her two bandmates seated just one row ahead of her have been killed.
I thought, you know, when they give you these instructions in the beginning when you get on the plane, how come they never tell you how far you have to run away from a burning plane? Because they never tell you.
Let's get away from here.
So we thought, I don't know, 100 meters.
Within minutes, emergency workers get to the crash site.
Hey! Over here! Over here!
24 of the 33 people on board Flight 3597 are dead, including Captain Lutz and First Officer Stefan Lehrer. Daniel Knecht, an investigator from Switzerland's Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau, arrives at the scene.
I got the call from our rescue service about 10:30 in the evening. Half an hour later, I was on the accident site. The rear part of the fuselage was quite intact. It was also the region where most of the survivors step out without injury.
For Peter Hogenkamp and his partner, it appears that moving to the rear of the plane saved their lives.
I think it was just good luck. I think it would have been a whole different story if we wouldn't have changed seats. So the passion fruits may have saved their lives.
While rescuers care for the survivors, Knecht and his team survey the crash site. The location of the wreckage far from the airport is of interest to the investigators.
4 kilometers and 50 meters from the runway.
The aircraft was not where he was intended to be. He collided with a hill east of runway 28, so obviously he was too low. And the first question was, why was this aircraft too low?
The black box flight recorders are found in the wreckage. They're in good condition. Investigators are well aware that this is the worst aviation disaster on Swiss territory in over a decade. They're under pressure to find answers fast. While work continues at the crash, a command post is established nearby. Jean Auvernet heads the Swiss Investigation Bureau. He takes charge of the Crossair file.
The public was very anxious about this crash. The media were raising many questions, so we naturally had to open a more in-depth investigation.
The accident happened at the end of a long day for Captain Lutz, but given his background, investigators must consider other causes.
We knew that the captain was very experienced. He had about 17,000 flight hours during his whole career. Flight instructor, flight examiner, within the company for more than 20 years.
The flight recorders are sent to a lab in Paris to extract their data. At the same time, investigators have begun retrieving fragments of wreckage from the crash site. They look for telltale signs of trouble.
The position of switches is very important. Also, if you have some indication panels, for example, with bulbs in it, you can, after a crash, you can analyze the different wires in the bulbs, and then you can determine which, for example, indications or even warnings were active at the moment of the impact.
An investigator comes across an intriguing piece of wreckage. Oil gauges provide information about the oil flowing to the plane's 4 turbofan engines. Curiously, one of them is installed upside down.
This raised a lot of questions for us and for the media. Everyone wanted to know how you could fly a plane with an instrument installed upside down. It wasn't a very important instrument. You could still read it, even if it was installed upside down.
But if this obvious problem was never fixed, what else could be wrong with the plane?
Obviously, there were maintenance issues here. We looked at how the company was doing the maintenance of the planes.
While this review is being launched, investigators study the plane's engines to determine if they were running at the time of the crash. Soil, tree branches, and other debris lodged inside the engines suggest they were.
We checked them out visually, and we saw that the 4 engines were turning in the moment of the accident.
Authorities need to be sure. They will have to check their findings against data from the flight recorders. In the meantime, the location of the crash suggests something may have tragically misled the crew on their descent towards Zurich Airport. Connect focuses on the flight charts they used to plan their approach.
Is the problem with the approach, or is the problem with the aircraft? This kind of question was dominant when we started the investigation.
Are you familiar with the 28 approach?
Yes, I've done it a couple of times.
The approach chart provides pilots with directions to the runway,
Zurich.
details about radio frequencies, as well as altitudes and speed for various stages of the landing. When investigators study an approach chart like the one the crew used, they make a shocking discovery. The chart does not show the hill that the plane hit.
An approach chart is a very important thing, because an indication which is not correct on this approach chart could mislead a crew and so easily make them do something wrong.
So, tell me about the runway and the conditions.
Overcast with light snowfall.
A faulty chart would certainly have been a danger to a crew unfamiliar with Zurich Airport. But Lutz had flown in and out of Zurich countless times. He and his first officer were both based in the city.
The commander was flying out of Zurich, I think, for the last 15 to 20 years. So he was really used to this airport.
Investigators conclude that the approach chart, while faulty, could have tripped up some crews, but not this one. Some definitive news finally arrives. The engine data from the black box confirms the observations at the crash site.
We could see quite easily that the engines worked absolutely normally.
Another potential cause of the accident is eliminated from the list: mechanical failure. Investigators now consider a different possibility.
I was covering the approach west position on the night of the accident.
Could air traffic control have somehow mishandled the plane? Investigators study records from the night of the accident and make a disconcerting find. Zurich Airport's control tower was understaffed at the time of the accident.
He left before his shift ended.
The supervisor in the tower went home early, leaving a lone controller to guide Flight 3597 in for its landing.
She was relatively young, and let's say she didn't have that much experience.
Investigators now study transcripts of conversations between that air traffic controller and the flight crew, looking for signs she made a mistake.
Crossair 3597, you're identified. Crossair 3597.
Speed 180 or less.
Crossair 28 for you.
Crossair 3597. Zurich approach. Crossair 3597.
Clear to land.
They find no indication the controller gave the crew faulty instructions. But they do come across the radio call by the pilot of the Crossair flight that landed minutes earlier.
Zurich Tower, this is Crossair 3891. Visibility approaching 28 was borderline. We could only see the runway from 1.3 miles out.
That pilot warned of poor conditions on the approach to runway 28.
She had options.
They wonder why the controller didn't shut the runway down. Because of poor visibility, she could have reopened runway 14 in spite of the noise bylaw. This would have allowed the crews to make an instrument approach. But she didn't do that.
Thank you, Crossair 3891. Have a good evening.
It would have been much easier to fly ILS approaches in this kind of weather, regardless of this political issue.
It's suspected that without her supervisor present, the controller lacked the experience to make such an important call.
So it's clear that to make the decision not to allow an approach on runway 28 and instead make it on runway 14 demanded a certain kind of confidence, a certain kind of courage.
However, Captain Lutz also heard the same warning.
28 was borderline. We could only see the runway from 1.3 miles out.
Gear down.
He kept going in spite of it. Investigators are now certain that the controller was in no way responsible.
A pilot can always say no. He can always reject the clearance. If he thinks that landing is probably not possible, he is free to reject an approach clearance and ask for a different one.
Jean Auvernet can't understand why Captain Lutz didn't do exactly that. He should have known that he didn't have to make a non-precision approach in bad weather.
When we saw the mistake the pilot had made, we immediately asked ourselves, well, how's it possible? Because for an experienced pilot who was an instructor, this was a really basic mistake.
Auvernet is beginning to wonder if something in Lutz's long career is hiding clues about his behavior on the night of the accident. One by one, investigators are ruling out the possible causes of the crash of Crossair Flight 3597. They hope the answer lies in the cockpit voice recorder, or CVR, of the doomed jet. After waiting many days for its data to be sent back from France, they now pore over it carefully, listening for any clues that might explain why the plane was flying so close to the ground, so far from the airport.
ILNAV is engaged.
Authorities get more than they expected. Not only is the CVR complete, but Captain Lutz offers a running commentary on everything he does.
And on inbound track 275. Speed is checked, flaps 18.
It's practically a roadmap to understanding what went on in the cockpit.
Flaps 33.
That's not usual that the pilot flying is talking so much about what he is doing or what he is seeing. And for the investigation, this helped a lot.
100 above.
Do we have ground contact?
Yes.
Investigators learned that the crew of Flight 3597 was looking for the runway and believed it would soon come into view.
From the CVR, we saw that the commander and also his co-pilot were not feeling some fear or feeling that something was not going as they planned.
But what they didn't know was that the plane was actually 4 miles shy of its target.
Damn. He said he saw the runway 1.3 miles.
300.
Captain Lutz obviously thought his jet was closer to the runway than it was. Investigators consider the possibility he was misled by his distance measuring equipment, or DME. It's supposed to tell pilots how far they are from the airport.
The DME indication would have given this distance, and then he would have detected immediately that he was below the approach pass.
Perhaps the DME from Flight 3597 was faulty. It's been recovered from the wreckage, but it's impossible to tell what information it gave the pilots. However, there is another way to check whether the instrument was functioning or not.
The DME distance is not recorded on the FDR, but on 2 occasions the pilots mentioned the distance.
6 miles is checked.
Yes.
But was Captain Lutz really 6 miles out from the runway when he made that report? Investigators compare the time Lutz checked his DME with radar data on the aircraft's location at that exact same time. They can see that when Lutz's instruments were telling him he was 6 miles out, that's precisely where he was.
So we knew that the pilots had an indication for the distance available at that time.
An instrument problem can now be crossed off the list as a factor in the crash, which only heightens the mystery.
I have ground contact. We're continuing on.
If the instrument was working, why did Lutz think he was closer to the runway than he actually was? The answer lies not in what investigators hear on the cockpit voice recorder, but what they don't hear.
I don't see anything after 6 miles.
Do we have ground contact?
Neither pilot read out a DME check after the 6-mile reading.
Yes.
It tells investigators that Lutz wasn't monitoring his vital instrument during the final minutes of his approach. Instead, he was preoccupied with spotting the lights of the runway. That's not what pilots are supposed to do.
The pilot flying is supposed to keep his eyes on the instruments because all the information he needs is there. He only switches to flying by sight when the non-flying pilot says, "Runway in sight." Only then can the captain take his eyes off the instruments and fly by sight because the landing is performed visually. If
Lutz had checked his instruments, he would have known how far from the runway he actually was. But how had he ended up such a long distance from it?
400. Confirmed 3 greens?
400.
Is checked.
116 knots.
Further analysis of the black box data reveals that Lutz put his plane into a steep descent as it began its final approach to Zurich airport. But it's readily apparent his approach profile was out of sync with the trajectory laid out in his chart. The approach profile for runway 28 calls for pilots to make a gradual and steady descent, which would bring them to 2,400 feet after they've cleared the hills around Zurich. Then pilots have to level off until they spot the runway. When investigators compare the approach Lutz made with the approach profile he was supposed to follow, they find that his overly steep descent brought him to 2,400 feet well before he cleared the hills. Then he continued to descend until he hit the ground. It's beginning to look like Lutz had violated one of the cardinal rules of flying. Aircraft making non-precision approaches are supposed to level off at minimum descent altitude or safe height until they have the runway in view. This safe height is intended to keep the aircraft above any potential hazards.
It's really a basic error. Every pilot is trained to respect such minimums. Not only with VOR DME approaches, but also with ILS approaches.
But Captain Lutz kept his aircraft in a steep descent without even pausing at 2,400 feet. The logical next question for investigators, could he see the runway or not?
I have ground contact.
We're continuing on.
What does he mean by ground contact?
They need to know if it was even possible for Lutz to see the runway when he reported ground contact. They retrace his steps in a simulator, programmed with the weather he was facing that night.
6 miles from runway, altitude 3,300 feet. 4.8 miles, 2,400 feet. Still no runway in sight.
No, he couldn't see the runway because there was a hill between him and the runway, and at that altitude, there's no way he could see it.
The conclusion? Captain Lutz had clearly violated his minimum descent altitude.
Whether there is flat terrain or hills, minimums are set accordingly, and in no way you can just bust the minimums, whether there's hills or not.
This discovery raises questions not just about Lutz's actions, but his young first officers as well.
2-4, the minimum.
2-4.
We're continuing on.
A first officer should not let his captain breach minimum descent altitudes.
The co-pilot could have said, no, stop, we can't see the runway, we're not descending.
He considered his captain an old pilot with a lot of experience, not making any mistakes. Most probably he was trusting him too much. And also by being submissive, maybe he wouldn't speak up on time, just to keep harmony in the cockpit.
There were no mechanical failures or instrument problems with the plane. Nor was the air traffic controller negligent in any way. But it is now clear that Captain Lutz made a series of catastrophic piloting errors that doomed Flight 3597 and claimed the lives of 24 people. Investigators dig deeper into Captain Hans-Ulrich Lutz's flying record to see if there's anything in his long background that could explain why he crashed Flight 3597. What they discover is truly alarming. Lutz applied to flight school when he was 17 years old. He was rejected 3 times because of his lack of education. He finally got his license at the age of 20, but continually failed exams to upgrade due to his inadequate comprehension of navigation systems. Captain Lutz may have had a long career, but it was not a stellar one.
Years of flying and flying hours don't say anything about competence.
For some reason, though, his record as a below-average pilot didn't prevent Crossair from hiring him in 1979.
There was a red line through his career where several incidents happened before and he had missed several checks. Well, he had some limits. But what's hard to understand for me is that they were identified. And decision was made to keep him flying.
Captain Lutz's limited abilities continued in his new job. While commanding a sightseeing tour of the Swiss Alps, he made a navigation error and ended up in Italy. He only realized his mistake when his passengers spotted road signs in Italian. In another incident, he wrecked a $1.5 million aircraft after inadvertently retracting the landing gear while the plane was still on the tarmac. Lutz's failures forced Crossair to fire him as an instructor, but they allowed him to continue flying passenger planes.
I personally do pilot assessments, and he would never have gone through my assessment with a positive recommendation.
Okay, approach course 13.
Investigators wonder why Crossair allowed Lutz to stay on as a pilot if he was not entirely competent. The answer appears to be they may have had little choice. Investigators' first glimpse into the problems at Crossair came after they found the upside-down gauge at the crash site.
We had to check if the employees had received the proper training, if they had the qualifications required for this kind of work.
No glaring maintenance issues were found, but a closer look at Crossair's hiring practices explains why Captain Lutz was allowed to keep flying. The airline may have grown too fast throughout the 80s and 90s.
La compagnie, elle s'est agrandie très rapidement.
The company expanded very rapidly, and with that success, it's clear that you have to quickly increase the staff. Office workers, mechanics, that's one thing, but pilots, you have to go out and find them.
Mais les pilotes, tu devais les trouver.
In those days, they were desperate for pilots, and somehow no decision was made to lay him off because of his questionable performance during his career.
Captain Lutz's failings caught up with him on November the 24th, 2001.
Make it go around. Go around!
24 people paid with their lives. After the accident report was issued, sweeping changes were made. Swiss aviation authorities had Crossair increase the number of employees overseeing pilots. They also scrutinized other airlines to determine if there were other substandard performers like Lutz.
One thing is for sure that the selection process has improved considerably. And of course, awareness of people's performance during their career was increased considerably.
Crossair went out of existence in 2002. It was folded into the Swiss national carrier.
As Crossair became Swiss, they adopted the previous Swissair selection process. And I can say today, which is already 9 years since, that safety has improved considerably, and also quality of the pilots that are hired by companies like Swiss.
Since the crash of Flight 3597, Zurich's Runway 28 has been upgraded with both an instrument landing system and an automatic warning that alerts controllers when a plane's approach is too low. There has never been another accident involving that runway. But the Crossair tragedy and the circumstances that spawned it isn't an isolated case. Regional airlines have boomed worldwide since the 1980s. Particularly in the United States, where they account for half of all flights and carry 100 million passengers a year. In the rush to fulfill consumer demand for cheap air travel, these airlines often hire less experienced pilots and pay them far lower salaries than their counterparts at major carriers. Some even neglect to test their pilots for basic skills.
There is no such thing as a compulsory pilot assessment before they get hired. Does not exist.
Colgan Air, in February of 2009, one of its planes crashed in Buffalo, New York, killing 50 people. The accident was blamed on the actions of an inexperienced crew. An eerie reminder of the Crossair disaster, it underlined the urgency of improving oversight of smaller carriers.
If you're making a product for a large company and you make a mistake, you may lose part of the market. You may lose some clients. But an airline company can lose a plane, its crew, and passengers. The stakes are very different.
February the 12th, 2009. Just outside Buffalo, New York.
Gear down. Folks alive.
Gears down.
Jesus Christ!
The airplane entered an aerodynamic stall. It did not recover.
It was one of the grisliest, nastiest scenes that I think I've seen.
The crash of Continental Connection Flight 3407 would be one of the NTSB's most important in decades, and would see a grieving father fight for changes to the laws governing small airlines.
I'm focused and determined to change what exists and not have another dad sitting here.
Mayday, Mayday.
Continental Connection Flight 3407, operated by Colgan Air, is en route from Newark, New Jersey to Buffalo, New York. It's been a busy flight for Captain Marvin Renslow. He's providing guidance to a new first officer, Rebecca Shaw, a former flight instructor from Seattle.
Bless you.
Shaw's only been with the airline for just over a year. She must decide if she now wants to become a captain.
I don't know what I want to do with the upgrade. It depends where I'm based.
Well, think of it this way. If you stayed on the queue, obviously you're not making the captain rate.
Right.
But you may have a better quality of life with regards to buying a house, having a schedule.
Shaw trained to be a first officer on the plane they're flying now. A Canadian-made Bombardier Q400. It's a twin-engine turboprop, popular with regional airlines. The 45 passengers have had a long night. Their plane was held up for 2 hours at Newark, a delay considerably longer than their journey. Flight 3407 is heading northwest over upstate New York. The trip is only 53 minutes. Visibility is poor, and there's a forecast of snow and moderate winds in Buffalo.
Just some water, please.
Elise Kausner is a student at Florida Coastal School of Law in Jacksonville. She's on her way to visit her family in Buffalo.
She had 5 nieces and nephews at the time, and they had a love luncheon at the kids' school, a couple of the nephews, and they both wanted Aunt Ellie to be their guest. Any excuse to come home, she came home. She talked to all of us from Newark.
Hey.
And she called us from the lounge.
Yeah, it's been over 2 hours.
She was PO'd because of the delay.
Folks from the flight deck, your first officer speaking. It looks like at this time we're about 10, maybe 15 minutes outside of Buffalo. Weather in Buffalo is pretty foggy. Snowing a little bit there. I'd like to make sure everyone remains in their seats so the flight attendants can prepare the cabin for arrival. Thank you.
Colgan 3407, descend and
Maintain 2,300.
Okay, down to 2,300. Colgan 3407.
Let's do a descent checklist, please. We can do the approach checklist along with it.
Sure. Bug set.
Set.
GPWS landing flaps selected 15 degrees.
The pilots go through a list of settings for the plane to continue its landing approach.
We're off. Yep.
Passengers can already glimpse the lights of Buffalo's suburbs. Clarence Center is on the approach path for aircraft landing at Buffalo's airport.
Gear down. Lokes alive.
Gears down.
All right, flaps 15.
Extending the flaps provides more lift, allowing the plane to slow to its final approach speed.
Jesus Christ!
Suddenly, the control column starts to shake. The Q400 is slipping out of control. Captain Renslow struggles to keep his plane flying. But it seems to have a mind of its own. The plane crashes into a house at 6038 Long Street. At air traffic control in Buffalo, Flight 3407 disappears from radar.
Check Colgan there, see if he's on you.
What's his call sign?
Colgan 3407.
Nope, I don't have him.
You see anything out there?
Nothing.
All right, call the fire department.
I'll never forget the dispatcher's words, plane crash, house on fire. I immediately got my shoes on and my coat on, got in my truck and started heading down the driveway.
Firefighters don't have far to go. 6038 Long Street, home of the Valinsky family, is less than a block from the Clarence Center station.
As I turned towards the village, the whole village was aglow. You could see the smoke, you could see the flame.
Karen Valinsky and her daughter make it out of their house alive, but her husband Douglas is killed.
My initial reaction was there was no way that somebody made it out. But the EMS division reported that they had 2 people and they were taking them to the hospital. And I said, well, which firefighters are they? And they said, they're not firefighters, Chief, they're survivors from the house. I actually physically had to go to the ambulance and look inside for myself to believe.
Firefighters have never seen a blaze like this.
If you've ever gone to a bonfire and stood 5 feet from it and you couldn't take it anymore, that's what it felt like from 100 feet away.
The height of it was just unbelievable, obviously because of the fuel that was probably added to it, and the debris area was very large. It was a very, very horrific sight.
We live in the town where the plane went down, right down the road. My son was driving home from a soccer game, and went right by the plane crash and called me up and said, there's a plane down in Clarence. Never really entered our brain that it was Ellie's plane.
Flight 3407 has crashed 8 kilometers short of Buffalo Airport. All 49 passengers and crew are dead, including Captain Marvin Renslow and First Officer Rebecca Shaw. But many more people could easily have been killed.
You picture a house, and to see a plane on top of this house, no more house left, no more plane, only the tail section. You're asking yourself, how in God's creation did this happen? And not wipe the whole block out.
The next call was again from my son and said, in fact, it was Ellie's plane. And he said, Dad, there's no survivors. At which point my wife shrieked and just hit the ground. Chris said he had never heard his mother make a sound like that, and I hope he never does again. So that's when we knew that she was gone, and that was probably within 45 minutes of the accident.
The scene in the morning is one of utter devastation.
Clint Crookshanks from the NTSB, and I start poking around.
Clint Crookshanks is one of the first investigators on the case.
When we arrived on scene, there was a fire still burning. It turns out it was from a gas line that had been broken in the house. The firemen would put the fire out and it would reignite every couple of minutes. It was one of the grisliest, nastiest scenes that I think I've seen.
Flight 3407 may have been a small plane, but it's the worst crash in the US in more than 7 years. It will become one of the NTSB's most important investigations. The fire at the crash site of Flight 3407 continues to burn, preventing investigators from examining the wreckage.
That's where I think the box.
The airplane had crashed into a house, and then it had burned all night long, so all the debris was basically in the house.
Our concern is that we're losing evidence. It's perishable, and if we can't get in there and get the fire out, then we're not able to maybe get a hold of evidence that might help us during the investigation.
Clint Crookshanks urgently needs to recover the black box flight recorders, which could contain valuable clues about the accident.
We knew that the recorders were in the tail part of the airplane.
Ordinarily, investigators don't go near a crash site that's still burning. But if the black boxes can't be rescued, they may never find out what brought down Flight 3407.
We started looking around and poking around into the wreckage and actually found out where they were.
Okay, whoa, it's probably in here, okay? The access panel's on the other side, so we're gonna have to cut a hole right there, okay?
The fire department produced a chop saw. We were able to cut a hole in the side of the fuselage and go in and grab the recorders and pull them out.
All right, that should do it.
To the immense relief of all, the recorders are undamaged.
Once we took the recorders out of the airplane, we put them on the jet and they were flown back to Washington, D.C. to our headquarters.
Now investigators are faced with a new hurdle. What little is left of the aircraft is hopelessly jumbled together with human remains and debris from the house.
It all burned and settled into the basement, so we had probably 10 feet of debris that we had to dig through in order to recover all of the airplane.
Authorities wonder how they can salvage any useful evidence from this chaos. They get invaluable assistance from an unusual source. A group of students learning to process crime scenes is enlisted to separate human remains from the rest of the debris.
They were graduate students from a local college, forensic anthropology students, and this was good experience for them to come dig through wreckage like this and look for human remains.
Landing gear over there, please.
It's dirty, painstaking work, but it frees up investigators to concentrate on the aircraft ruins.
So we were on our hands and knees with brooms, with little shovels, scooping out debris, identifying it as to house debris or airplane debris, and then putting it in different piles. The first question for me as a structures engineer is to figure out if the whole airplane made it to the scene of the crash.
The wreckage is carefully studied to determine if the plane's four corners, nose, tail, and both wingtips are present.
If we find all four corners of the airplane, then we know that there was no in-flight breakup. There was nothing that departed the airplane during the flight that may have caused the accident.
One wing has been consumed by fire. The other is shattered into pieces.
Hey, have a look at this.
But investigators are gradually finding what they've been searching for.
Oh yeah, it's the last piece. It's the left one.
It wasn't until several days into the investigation, as we were scraping away some of the debris, that we actually found evidence of the left wing and the nose.
Investigators now have all the pieces they need to conclude that the entire plane is at the crash site. Whatever caused the disaster was not the result of a breakup in flight. The tragedy of Flight 3407 is under intense scrutiny at the NTSB offices in Washington. Officials there try to determine if some kind of malfunction caused the crash.
On this particular accident, we knew it was a landing accident, so we wanted to check the aircraft's performance, and then also we checked for flight control continuity.
Much of this responsibility falls to Scott Warren.
My role in the investigation was to be the systems group chairman for the safety board, so I was in charge of looking at all of the aircraft systems.
Warren analyzes the aircraft's cockpit voice recorder, or CVR, to determine if there were any indications of a problem in the cockpit.
Attendants can prepare the cabin for arrival. Thank you. Is that ice on the windshield?
He discovers that 6 minutes before the crash, the crew of Flight 3407 had noticed a buildup of ice on the aircraft.
Got it on my side.
You don't have yours?
Oh, yeah. Oh, it's lots of ice.
Ice can be a deadly threat to any airplane.
If an aircraft has ice on it, it will have more drag on it, so it'll require more power to maintain a given airspeed.
Oh, yeah. It's the most I've seen on the leading edges in a long time.
Until a year ago, Rebecca Shaw had no experience with ice on an aircraft.
I'd never seen icing conditions. Never de-iced. Never experienced any of that.
When ice accretes on a wing, it adds weight to the airplane, but most importantly, it changes the shape of the wing. And of course, it's the shape, the curved shape of the wing that actually creates the lift. So by changing the lift characteristics of the airplane, it makes it less able to fly.
You know, I'd have freaked out. Like, I'd have seen this much ice and thought, oh my gosh, we were gonna crash.
Observing that there was ice on the airplane was an important thing to do. But then it would be important to turn around and verify that your anti-ice and de-ice equipment was on, and there was no indication on the voice recorder that they actually rechecked.
Flaps 15.
The CVR reveals that only minutes after the crew detected ice, a device called the stick shaker went off. It was a warning that the plane was about to stall, literally to fall out of the sky. Shortly afterwards, the aircraft did precisely that.
We know there were icing conditions. The only question was, were they bad enough to induce this airplane to have a failure?
Ice is now the chief suspect in the crash of Flight 3407.
If it's ice, let's prove it.
We were all convinced that we had an icing accident. We said, yeah, it's going to be an icing accident. We just got to make sure we look for these few key aspects of icing, verify that, and we're good.
But some of the victims' family members are less convinced.
Our initial thought was that it was an ice-related incident, that it was an icy night and brought the plane down. And as we began to talk to people who knew airline travel, who were pilots themselves, they would look kind of askance and say, I don't think so. That doesn't make sense.
Some investigators share that suspicion. Scott Warren knows a plane like the Q400 has a sophisticated de-icing system. It's designed to keep ice from building up on the wings and other critical parts of the aircraft. To prevent ice accumulating, the plane has rubber bladders along the front of the wings, called de-icing boots. A series of valves uses air from the engines to inflate the boots and crack the ice off the wing.
Those boots are designed to inflate periodically, and that inflation breaks off the ice that's accumulated on those leading edges.
Warren now wonders if the crew of Flight 3407 actually turned on their de-icing equipment. He studies data from the plane's other black box, its Flight Data Recorder, or FDR. It tracks the workings of crucial aircraft systems, including the de-icing mechanism.
We know from the FDR data that the de-icing system had been selected on by the crew, and it was on during the majority of the flight, and certainly at the end of the flight it was recorded in the on position.
But now Warren needs to figure out if the device was actually working.
Just because the data records that the system is on, that's a start, but you can't necessarily believe that one piece of information.
The only way to know is to find what remains of the plane's de-icing system and determine if it was active when the aircraft went down. Clint Cruikshank's team hunts for a crucial component of the system, the valves.
Excuse me. Okay, everyone, I just want to...
For the de-ice valves, we said, here's what it looks like. Look for something like this. If we can find those valves and we can test them and see if they're operating correctly.
The valves were very important to us because they are the key component that moves air from the engines where the bleed air originates for the de-icing system.
Okay, good. 5 more to go.
Five of the plane's 6 de-icing valves are eventually recovered.
Some were badly burned, some were in fairly good shape. And we took those valves and we conducted as much testing on those valves as we thought was appropriate for the level of damage. We looked at the level of electrical conductivity, and we looked at the pressure testing. We looked at a wide variety of things depending on the condition of the valve itself. And as far as we could tell, all those valves were working properly.
Is that ice on the windshield?
Got it on my side.
Now investigators have to consider the possibility
Oh, yeah. Oh, it's lots of ice.
that there was so much ice on the wings that the de-icing system couldn't get rid of it fast enough.
Oh, yeah. That's the most I've seen on the leading edges in a long time.
It has happened before. In Roselawn, Indiana, a French-built commuter plane crashed in 1994 after suffering a catastrophic buildup of ice on the wing. By analyzing how much power was needed for the plane to maintain its airspeed, investigators reach a surprising conclusion.
Basically, the aircraft was flying as if it had a relatively small amount of ice on it, but a very manageable amount of ice.
Looks normal.
It was not overloaded, it was not excessive.
If ice didn't bring down the plane, something else must have caused it to stall. Warren studies the Q400's operating manual to learn the plane's stall speed, the velocity at which it can no longer generate enough lift to stay in the air. He discovers that in the conditions Flight 3407 was flying through, it's roughly 111 knots. He now compares the plane's stall speed with its actual airspeed just before the stall warning went off. 131 knots, well above the danger zone.
Flaps 15.
When the stick shaker went off,
Jesus Christ!
they were not necessarily at the edge of a stall. They were still 20 knots or so away from the stall.
This new revelation deepens the mystery of Flight 3407. If it wasn't stalling, why did it fall out of the sky? Investigators turn their attention to the critical seconds before Flight 3407 went out of control. They look for clues that could explain why the stall warning went off when the aircraft was flying well within its safety margins. They discover that this plane has a unique feature known as a reference speed switch. It governs the sensitivity of the plane's stall warning.
Very few airplanes, in my experience, have such a switch. This airplane is the only one I know of that has an actual switch on the overhead panel. It was designed by the manufacturer to be an extra safety feature.
Some kind of variable ref speed?
Pilots are supposed to turn on the reference speed switch when they're going to be flying through icing conditions.
And we'll probably be picking up some ice.
When in the increase position, it reminds pilots to fly faster to counteract any drag effect ice will have on the aircraft.
When you are in icing conditions and ice does accrue on the wing, it can cause the stall speed to go up And so this ref speed switch correspondingly causes the warning to come on sooner or at a higher speed.
What that switch does is it basically changes the trigger settings for the stick shakers.
So we had to ask the manufacturer, how does this switch work? And what we found was it was part of the system's description that the crews got when they went through training, but they didn't get a lot of training on how to handle that switch. It seemed like it was too simple to worry about.
Investigators need to know if the crew of Flight 3407 had turned on the reference speed switch, triggering the stick shaker at a faster than normal speed. The flight data recorder doesn't show whether the switch was on. Investigators must find another way of determining its position at the time of the accident.
Glenn here.
Clint Cruikshanks is given a new priority.
All right, I'll see if we have it.
Recover the ice protection panel from the Q400's cockpit, where the reference speed switch is housed. Since the panel was in the cockpit, finding it is a challenge.
Most of the front end of the airplane was consumed by fire, and so we didn't find anything except for little balls of molten aluminum, little wire bundles, and a lot of ash.
But after an extensive search, Cruikshanks discovers that the ice protection panel is one of the few pieces of the cockpit that survived.
Bingo.
However, the knobs and switches are barely recognizable. Cruikshanks examines the charred panel to check the position of the reference speed switch. It was set to activate stall warnings at higher than normal speeds.
We did find the ref speed switch in the wreckage, and it was in the increased position.
This discovery only raises more questions.
We'll probably be picking up some ice.
The cockpit voice recorder indicates that as Renslow was beginning his descent into Buffalo, he commanded his plane to fly at the normal approach speed.
Gear down.
But what's strange is that with his reference speed switch on, he actually should have been flying faster, as this is what the switch would remind him to do. So why wasn't he? The plane's computer warned the crew to fly faster, according to the settings they had configured, by displaying a set of red bars on the airspeed indicator.
You may have a better quality of life with regards to...
These bars are meant to warn the pilots that a stick shaker activation is imminent.
Whenever it's right.
If you're looking at the airspeed indicator, you should be aware that you're getting slow, and the stall warning may come on.
Jesus Christ!
It seems Renslow and Shaw were caught off guard. Still, they could have easily corrected the situation.
Once the stick shaker activated, they could have turned the switch off, or they could have put the nose down and increased their airspeed.
It's clear to investigators that Flight 3407 wasn't in danger of stalling when the stick shaker went off. So now they need to know exactly what happened after the stall warning was activated. An animated simulation of the crash is constructed, based on information from the flight recorders.
Watch what happens just after the stick shaker goes off.
It illustrates that just after the stick shaker was triggered, the plane suddenly pulled up. This action dramatically slowed the aircraft, and at this point it did stall.
Essentially, the airplane entered an aerodynamic stall from which it did not recover. It pitched over and hit the ground.
Investigators are dumbfounded. Flight 3407 wasn't stalling when the stick shaker went off, but a few seconds later it was. The crew's every action during that brief time now demands careful scrutiny.
What did they do?
It's a puzzle. How could a trained flight crew take a plane that wasn't stalling and in the space of a few moments make it fall from the sky?
Anytime you have an apparent stall for no apparent reason, that's a mystery. You would expect that no flight crew would stall an airliner. So the question is why?
The focus of the investigation now switches from the plane to the crew, specifically on the moves they made during the critical seconds after the stall warning sounded.
We wanted to see if the way they flew the airplane was the way they were trained, according to the standard operating procedures that are portrayed in their flight manuals.
The flight data recorder retains information from more than 1,000 different aspects of the Q400's flight operations. From the airspeed and altitude to the position of the rudder pedals and throttles. It also records the movements of the most critical flight control, the control column. Pilots use the control column to change the position of the elevators and ailerons, which manage the direction of the plane. The flight data recorder stores information not just about the control column's position, but how much force is applied to it as well.
The FDR records what the control positions were. It has sensors built into the control column, it has sensors built into the control wheel.
What Scott Warren finds when analyzing the control column's position is stunning. In response to the stick shaker, Captain Renslow should have pushed the column forward to bring the nose down and gain speed. But for some reason, he did the exact opposite.
We found that the crew, instead of pushing forward, which is the normal response to a stick shaker triggering, the crew was actually pulling back on the controls.
This had the effect of pulling the nose up, causing the airspeed to drop and tipping the aircraft into an actual stall. Captain Renslow had apparently mishandled one of the most elemental piloting maneuvers: how to recover from a stall. Above everything, it requires gaining airspeed to get out of the red.
The recovery procedure is fairly simple and straightforward. It requires pushing forward on the controls and adding full power. At any point in time, had the captain pushed forward on those flight controls, he had a reasonably good chance of recovering quickly.
From everything we've gained, that stall was recoverable on a repeated number of levels on a repeated basis. There was no reason for that plane to go down.
Investigators also learned that First Officer Shaw, in trying to help Renslow deal with the crisis, inadvertently made things worse.
I put the flaps up!
She retracted the flaps, reducing the amount of lift as the plane struggled to stay in the air.
Had the first officer simply called out, "You're stalled," advanced the power, pushed the nose over, the airplane would have been able to recover.
From a human point of view, it's sad to recognize that those sorts of things happened and the tragedy that came from that.
It's concluded that Captain Renslow's failure to properly respond to the stall warning was the primary cause of the crash of Flight 3407. As the issue is now pilot error rather than mechanical failure, human performance investigator Evan Byrne is brought on board. His first question: why hadn't either Renslow or Shaw noticed that their airspeed was too low for the icy conditions?
In this case, we can look back towards the fact that there were clear and conspicuous cues of the deteriorating airspeed that were not heeded by the captain.
Byrne listens to the cockpit voice recording to try to understand what might have led to that oversight.
Where you could be home with your husband to take care of and all that stuff.
He learns that the crew had been talking throughout the flight. The conversation continued during the landing approach. It's a violation of a rule known as the sterile cockpit, which bans non-essential conversation during critical phases of the flight.
You're gonna be upgraded in 6 months. Blah, blah, blah.
Quite simply, it prohibits conversations that aren't related to the operation of the flight.
Let's do a descent checklist, please. We can do the approach checklist along with it.
Bug set.
Byrne also discovers that because of the cockpit banter, the crew performed critical checklists and briefings late.
Off. Hydraulic pressure and quantity.
Distracted, the crew probably didn't see the red bar indicating they were flying too slowly for the conditions the plane had been configured for.
On. Approach checklist complete.
Rock and roll.
When crews deviate from standard operating procedures and perform checklists late or don't make the required callouts, they become more vulnerable to subtle mistakes that they may make inadvertently that could lead to startle and surprise or unanticipated events that they have to respond to.
The evidence is unequivocal. The crew of Flight 3407 was badly distracted throughout the approach.
Came in when we interviewed, and he said, "Yeah, you're gonna be upgraded in 6 months."
They had forgotten a key setting they had made that required them to fly faster than normal. They had missed indications that they were flying too slow for icing conditions. Then Captain Renslow had reacted incorrectly to a stall warning, sealing the fate of the plane. Evan Byrne wonders, what could have caused a trained airline flight crew to have made such missteps? He finds a clue on the cockpit voice recording.
Excuse me.
The crew was showing signs of fatigue. Could Renslow and Shaw have been too tired to function effectively on the flight deck? It's a tough question. Answering it will require tracking their movements during the 72 hours leading up to the crash.
It's basic gumshoe detective work in the investigation where we're trying to collect as many facts as we can.
Byrne interviews the families of the pilots.
Could I speak to Mrs. Renslow, please?
He studies the pilots' mobile phone bills and records of text messages. He searches the airline's computer system to determine if and when the crew used it to check their schedules. He needs to track their every move.
And what time did Rebecca leave the house?
We're talking to colleagues or other pilots, check airmen, instructors, and we ask all those people about the pilots, about their recent activities.
He learns that neither pilot actually lived anywhere near Newark, but could not afford to stay in hotels on their salaries. Captain Renslow was earning $60,000 annually at Colgan Air. First Officer Shaw was being paid less than $16,000 a year, substantially less than an average bus driver. As a result, both pilots had made long cross-country commutes to Newark. Captain Renslow from his home in Florida, and Rebecca Shaw from Seattle, Washington. In fact, Shaw had commuted all night from Seattle on a cargo flight that connected through Memphis. Captain Renslow had spent the night in the airline's crew lounge at Newark Airport, after having already worked 2 days. He was seen sleeping on a couch in the lounge. It was against company rules, but pilots who couldn't afford housing near the airport did it anyway. Records show that at 3:10 a.m. on the morning of the crash, Renslow was awake. He checked his work schedule on the airline's computer network.
Next stop, Buffalo.
At 7:29 a.m., Rebecca Shaw sent a text message to her husband, telling him she'd arrived safely in Newark.
Hi, honey, it's me.
Phone records indicate that later in the morning, Captain Renslow was on the phone several times. Rebecca Shaw was noticed having a nap, catching up on the rest she'd lost flying in the night before.
It's not a lot of sleep.
We ultimately concluded that it was likely that both crew members were experiencing some effects of fatigue at the time of the accident.
Her job is to watch the airspeed. Her job was to watch the instrument panel, and my view is she was fatigued to the point where it's like right here in your soul doll. I think that's where she was, and he just was not capable. He was just, he shouldn't have been flying an airplane.
The revelation leads John Kausner to become a fierce advocate for changes to the industry. He raises awareness among both lawmakers and the public about the need to improve regulations governing pilots at regional airlines.
This is just saying we support 3407 families, their fight for aviation safety, and these representatives and congressmen and senators have done that for us, and we're very appreciative.
He takes his fight all the way to Washington, D.C.
We needed to do something, and so we began to advocate in Washington weekly, every other week. I mean, we've made innumerable trips down there. And immediately the families just gelled. We all attended the hearings and began to say, this is what we can do.
The crash of Flight 3407 focused the world's attention on a growing safety problem. The relatives of those who were killed will help eliminate that threat. The crash of Flight 3407 exposed wide-ranging shortcomings in the regulations that govern regional airlines. These smaller airlines now make up half of all daily passenger flights in the US. Their pilots are generally younger, less experienced, earn less, and work long hours.
Their levels of safety are way different from the majors. They have a much lower threshold in training, in ability, so in pay, obviously, so they can't attract a higher qualified pilot.
There are pretty low wages, pretty difficult working conditions, and we don't seem to attract the same level of applicant that we used to. Some regional airlines get into a bind, and they have to hire the first people that meet the minimums.
In the US, of the 7 fatal accidents involving passenger jets over the past 10 years, 5 have involved regional airlines. Those include the crash of Delta Connection Flight 5191 in August 2006, which killed 49 people when the crew took off from the wrong runway. John Kausner's campaign to change laws governing pilots has paid off.
We relied on your support. We needed your support. You nurtured us. We want to thank all of you from all of us.
A year and a half after the crash, under pressure from Kausner and other victims' family members, the US Senate passed a bill which toughens training requirements and forces the FAA to draw up new rules on pilot fatigue. Studies into the problem of overtired pilots are already underway. At the University of Iowa, researchers are developing a system that could help pilots resist fatigue, stay engaged with the critical task of flying, and prevent future tragedies like that of Flight 3407. Thomas Schnell is a human factors engineer.
We use a number of neurocognitive and physiological sensors that we apply on subjects, pilots that we invite for our studies.
Is going to be free floating. Okay. We'll just go ahead.
He's studying how pilots stay alert on the flight deck as a test subject conducts a cross-country journey in a simulator. Using sensors, he can determine how alert and engaged a pilot really is. The research could lead to the development of fatigue detectors on airplanes.
We are trying to predict pilot state so that we can adjust something on the flight deck to prevent the problem from getting worse or starting in the first place. We monitor brain activity, eye movement activity, heart, the EKG and respiration and other parameters in an effort to figure out what the pilot's or the crew's state is. Are they fatigued, overworked? Are they disengaged or distracted? This section is where they were really drowsy, and you can see that the gaze has become kind of bored.
Schnell instructs the flight simulator to trigger a major systems failure in the cockpit.
It's no good. Everything's dead. Hydraulic systems have failed. Flaps are not deployed.
Crank up that heat map so we can see what this brain activity was.
Brace for impact.
When a crew is fatigued, what you might see is their reaction to events may slow down. So you'll see mistakes being made on the flight deck.
It's precisely these kinds of mistakes on the part of Renslow and Shaw that ultimately crashed Flight 3407 and killed 50 people.
It's a tragedy that should not have happened, that was foreseeable, was preventable, and it's repeatable if we don't do something about it. I'm focused and determined to change what exists and not have another dad sitting here.